Knights of Guinevere has been a show that I feel has a good marking for success later on in line. If not just for the fact that it's directed by Dana Terrace, the creator of the Owl House, it's the more gory and gruesome nature of the pilot so far by itself, as it does just enough to provide intrigue without building too much that the story becomes predictable. A lot of show-don't-telling, using primarily small gaps of silence between certain portions, like Frankie's most definitely not hallucinatory disruptions, or even just the creaking of metal once they head into the lower labs. It's a real atmospheric piece of fiction from what I've seen so far. But today we're here to talk about two things, or rather a character and the concept and design that goes into it. Let's say, the guards and the caretakers of Park Planet. Not necessarily just Gwen herself, but rather the others, the Sun and Moon Knights, the former of which has been confirmed in the credits to be named Sir Arthur, and the fandom predicts that the latter is Sir Lancelot. There is a rather interesting contrast between the two in both their design standpoint and in the manner that they connect to Frankie and Andy in both their own characterizations, or rather Sir Arthur's in the short scenes that we've seen within the show itself, in addition to the possibility of some form of prediction as to where the show might be headed through this comparison. Part 1. The False Knights. To start off, we can analyze most of the scenes that Sir Arthur appears in, which, to be honest, is just one, though I imagine that eventually he might be repaired, and most of the other guards that are sent their way could develop a similar kind of behavioral pattern, as would normally be the case, though, considering that the blood that exited from him was actually red against the blue blood that seems to be pouring out of the machinery, and in Olivia's case herself as well, from the tubes connected to her older self, maybe they are more biological than anything else. He is shown to be this massive entity that is, like most of the machinery in this show, half organic and half technological, which in of itself is interesting considering the more darker tones than some of the other creations around Olivia's room in present time, being a darker lavender with gold and some dark grays and blacks, the only real aspect of color, as seen when he's chasing Andy and Frankie, being his own son Face. FNAF feature hard out, but still, even so, most of his coloration is muted. From the timeline of events, which seems to have occurred nearly twice as long between when we see Olivia as a child and Andy and Frankie as kids, we can assume that there was some initial design towards the beginning of Olivia's early years at Park's Planets as its new owner, after Orville's supposed passing, from what we can assume. But even so, I disagree with the notion that a small bit, considering the beginning lines of the pilot. Now, these statements make the entire situation out to be in direct relation to the blue blood that we see throughout most of the world so far. It's seeming to be the cause of the blue blood and the blue lung situation that seems to be powering most of the machines we see, with plumes of blue smoke from the surface and everything. But I thought of it as a bit different than that. What if Sir Arthur and potentially Sir Lancelot were not created after Olivia was given Park Planet, but before this time, when she was still a child? We can clearly see that besides the average human, though I don't believe Olivia counts as such, everyone else seems to have red blood as a whole, with those with blue lung typically expelling damaged blood vessels in the lungs themselves. But you know what machines do have red blood? Sir Arthur, which could obviously make sense into the entire realization of what the representation of this description means, since before blue blood, as we aren't given a timeline or dates as to when Park Planet was created, we can assume they're substituted for actual blood, whether animals or more likely human candidates. However, due to the cost more than ethical concerns, it makes more sense for Sir Arthur and his secondary partner, to which I'll call them both the False Knights from here on out, who are far stronger than anything else we've seen other than Gwen, to be machines that can still be used for a variety of tasks, maybe even the early construction of Park Planet. But through these cost and resource concerns, a more artificial version of blood might have been created to house them in there at the same time. Part 2. The Primal Childhood. One of the major differences between the design choice of the False Knights and those of other related creatures or designs of Park Planet is obviously the more intricate and medieval nature of their own constructions, which is most likely a design feature that has to do with Olivia's declining mentality within the context of the situation itself. Whatever past event Orville had told her to leave behind. We see that she retains a large part of her childlike aesthetic, even if it is a contrast to the more diluted and softened personality that she exhibits during the earlier point of the timeline itself. Coined by Sigmund Freud, the concept of trauma reenactment is described under the semblance of involuntary repetition of behaviors, thoughts, or experiences that resemble a previous traumatic event. It is a common phenomenon among individuals who have experienced significant trauma, such as abuse, neglect, or disaster, and is something that seems to have occurred within Olivia, throughout the common idea that after her mother's passing, she had reconstructed her own identity under a shift of reality perception into a more maternal role, essentially fixing Guinevere, whom she sees as that child substitute while she retains the mother or caretaker role. The injury is perhaps a model template of whatever illness that had harmed her mother. This seems to be bled into the decorative stabilization of the park itself, especially with it being handed to her, though there seems to be a disconnect of sorts within her perspective. From the little we've been shown in the opening montage of the years passing by and Olivia growing up wherever she seemingly shows a more emotional and social identity that contrasts that of her younger age. Be that the case, however, there is one scene that shows that she still intends and continues to try to fix Guinevere throughout the same period of time, showcasing and contrasting view between social and intrusive variations of her own personality, the social and intrusive identity. Social identity is derived from actively embracing group memberships. It provides a positive sense of belonging and boosts self-esteem. Egocentric, consistent with one's self-concept, and it integrates into the self. It helps define who we are as a person. While intrusive identities are generated from unwanted distress, from our own traumas, our own past behaviors that we replicate as a form of understanding the world around us when we're far younger. This intrusive identity from Olivia often comes in the shapes of the actions, environment, and even aesthetic choices that we can take as we develop, typically through the ages of 12 to 18, which seems to be around the age group that Olivia is during the early parts of the montage itself, if not a bit older. So her superego could be at the very least present in the brain, but from the actions themselves, there's a clear understanding that from either parental neglect, along with the possibility that, like Guinevere, she too was locked up in the tower we see her in, this truly shows that her traumatic identity is something that is developed over time. Isolation within a contained space with limited attachments and awareness of the outside world, besides all the toys and machines we see her with and that she's been given, there's this clear outlet that she can use, and it is under this present standardization that it would be used as a child-friendly atmosphere that she's been indoctrinated into to take part of, and to take out any frustration and anger or negative emotions that she could be feeling on Guinevere at first, but a more subtle manneristic way to figures like Sir Arthur and the caretakers around her decades later. Going back to Sir Arthur, he clearly showcases some semblance of this white knight behavior often attributed towards his Arthurian variant by stating,
"Goodly ladies, arrest thy steps, thine hearts I wouldst make mine."
Which, with a simple breakdown of the phrase, pretty much means, beautiful ladies, stop walking, I want to win your affection and love. Of course, this could also just be referring to the Arthurian legends, where King Arthur and Queen Guinevere are in love with one another, but the fact that it's such a more welcoming line disguised under the grotesque figure, it just adds up to the more primal and fleshy notion of Olivia's own mentality. Part 3. Nice versus good. This is more so a last-minute observation I had when looking through the pilot itself, a couple of details that I found to be really intriguing. This being that Sir Arthur, through appearance and behaviors himself, seems to be a parallel to Frankie, as much as anything else, and in fact there showcases a strong resemblance of the potential trio of sorts, that Sir Arthur, the secondary guard, thought of as Sir Lancelot, and Olivia are mirrored versions of Franklin, Andy, and Guinevere, taking on the dual guards, knights protecting the royal figure in title or actuality. Sir Arthur and Franklin are both within a strong connection to the royal figure, both assist, with the former being the one trusted to by Olivia to capture Guinevere, and with Franklin being the one to take the initiative to actually help fix Guinevere herself, both being the fairly bulky of the two, Sir Arthur having the massive flesh arm, while Lancelot is more lengthy with the normal armor and all limbs, Franklin and Andy holding the same format of dynamic and of course their personalities, if you can call what Sir Arthur is saying as such, being a lot more joyful, though that could just be programming. But it matches Franklin's personality as being the more emotionally charged of her and Andy, holding a stronger connection between the two. Though Sir Arthur did get completely dogged on by Guinevere, so whatever is left of him might be repaired or not, it really depends on how much of this information can be used later on. But there is a primal nature to this goodness of childhood innocence. Nothing new, of course. We've seen these kind of mascot horror genres of games and movies come out over the last decade or so, but a lot of this reminds me of stories like Abandoned by Disney or SCP-823. It's a visceral variation of the stories and lands of happiness we knew as children. And I really love the pilot so far, and I'm excited to see where it's going after all of this. But until then, Dana Terrace, keep doing what you're doing, and, well, I guess we'll just wait to see what comes afterwards.